So it has been a rough couple of months, maybe longer than that for François Legault and the CAQ government. You know what the polls show, but there was an interesting article that I thought we should follow up on this week because we have heard, and you don't have to really be, that on top of this politically. We've heard of the big failures, right, financially, right? There have been some obvious ones like Northvolt, like Lion Electric, but the Journal de Montréal ran a story which basically, because I think François Legault actually brought up this term, right? He said, my batting average, in other words, how well he's done or how well the government's done on projects they have invested in, have actually done. Well, it turns out his batting average is nothing to write home about. In fact, it's pretty dismal. Sylvain Larocque is a business reporter at the Journal de Montréal. He's on the line. Sylvain, thank you for the time this afternoon.
Hello, Aaron.
Let me begin by saying, usually, in batting average, if a guy's hitting 333, that's decent. But when it comes to losing billions of dollars, that's not so good.
Yeah, exactly, because you and I are paying the invoice, there's been, I thought it was an interesting exercise, since he's been in power, so 2018, till now, there's been 15 or 16, announcements that they took part in, for economic announcements, support for companies. So I said, now maybe it's the time to look at it, and has it been a success or failure for each of these announcements? So 9 out of 16 were actually failures. So that's pretty low. That's under 50%. I don't know how much in baseball scoring, but it's very low. So I knew there were lots of bad projects, but I didn't know that. I didn't realize before making the calculation that the batting average was so low. So I think it was an interesting thing to do,
Yeah, it's also interesting to remind people, of course, when François Legault came into power, right? He was a businessman. He had a background. He said, I'm an accountant. And, and obviously that will help. It's not even been a slightest of helps.
No, not at all. And, we're talking about billions of dollars. So, of course, the case that's, I think is the most known now is Northvolt. In a matter of not even 20, I think it was a bit more than 12 months, we lost $270 million on that. And there's still the big loan on the big field that they bought. Mm-hmm. That's $240 million that we don't know if we're going to be able to recoup totally. So just there, it's at least almost $300 million, maybe more. Then actually 4 of the 5 projects that were announced by François Legault for the battery industry were actually failures. There's Lion Electric. We heard a lot about it. There was the big plant for Ford that was abandoned. Maybe it's going to come back, but we're not sure at all. And the other plant for GM. And so that's 4 projects. There's only one that maybe will work. It's a Volta. It's lesser known. So they put a lot of, energy on the battery because they thought it was a future industry, and we have knowledge here in Quebec, with electricity and Hydro-Quebec and all of that. But I think we were missing something very important, maybe the knowledge of the automotive industry. And I think we underestimated how China was ahead of us on that. So you put a lot of political capital on that, and unfortunately, it was not a big success.
You also mentioned a couple of people may have forgotten about, like the Bombardier C series. That's worth a few $100 million too. Yeah.
Actually, we lost $400 million there, and that was in a few years. I think it was less than 3 years that we lost that money, because Legault likes to remind people that the big loss on the C series from Bombardier was $1.3 billion under the previous government, but actually he did put back like around $800 million, mm-hmm. and we already lost half of that. Just in a matter of a few years. So at least there's jobs in Mirabel. There's like 3,000 jobs there. So at least there's economic activity. But in terms of cost for the taxpayer, it's been, I calculated it was around $500,000 per job. So
wow.
you can imagine,
Nice job. Then you have the project Suncor and Shell. That's been costly for Quebecers too?
Yeah, more than $200 million. A project that was announced, I think, in 2020, so not that far ago. And it was a biomethanol project in Varennes. The plant is half built, and most of the money was actually spent by governments. So when you see that, usually it's not a good sign.
Yeah, and we had a story, I guess it's only a week or so ago, about Sonder, right? So this developed in Montreal, and the government very proud to invested in this, and they lost all of that too.
Yeah. It happens all too often. And you'd think that because François Legault, made the announcement himself, it was important for him, for the government, you'd think that it'd be solid projects. But what we see here is that most of those projects were not really, great projects. And it's like they're gambling public money, it seems to me.
Sylvain, with respect, and I know he's mentioned somewhere in the story, Pierre Fitzgibbon, who decided to walk maybe at just the right time before we found out how badly things he had sort of thought would work didn't. How much is he involved in this?
Well, 100%. All of the projects that I mentioned are all Pierre Fitzgibbon projects. So Pierre Fitzgibbon and François Legault were working hand in hand, and they're both accountants. They're both, coming from the business world, and I think they gave a lot of confidence to people because they were from the business world. That they know how to count, they know how to make business, and all of that. But it's the same right now in Ottawa with Mark Carney. I hope it's going to be better in the outcome. But, sometimes they give us a lot of confidence. And when you look at the result, it's not always as great as they thought it would be.
By the way, one of the other things, and I thought this was a bonus for Montreal, right? We have all this video game, all these tech people working here, and that continues to be a big industry. But from what I read in the story, the suggestion here is that, we've given them so many tax credits. It's not about even growing a business. The government's invested in this as well.
Yeah, it's hundreds of, I don't know, it's at least, dozens of millions every year that we give to the video game industry through tax credits. I think at the beginning it made sense to, start an industry from the ground up. But now, like 20 years later, is it still, a right way to spend the money? To still give all of that money to one industry in particular. So I think the question has to be asked about that too.
Is there anything you can actually pinpoint that actually turned out to be successful where we invested money and maybe made money or at least didn't lose money?
There's not that many, actually. There's a few investments, in the aerospace industry that they're fairly recent. So there's one big one with MDA and Telesat Canada. That's MDA is based in West Island, so it's a big project of satellites in the space. So that maybe that's gonna work. It's too early to know. There's some investments like in the forestry industry. It's very strong in the regions, so maybe it made sense to help the regions there. Not too much losses there and lots of jobs. So you have to put everything and take account of everything when you spend public money like this. When it's in the regions, I think you have to be a bit more, understanding that, they need money sometimes to develop their businesses there.
By the way, just as a final question, I didn't even mention this, but I know it's mentioned in your piece. I mean, Kruger Paper was another one they invested in that they're going to take a bath on, right?
Yeah. I think they loaned $200 million to Kruger, which is a very big company, as you know. They make tissue paper and things like that, and they actually wrote off already $50 million in just a few years. So it's like a big gift for a big company that's one of the wealthiest family in Quebec, actually. So that's interesting.
Well, I can hardly wait for the economic update, which we're getting, I think, either this week or next, to find out just how big the deficit is going to be. Again, for next year, it's hard to believe it could be any bigger than the 13 or however much it is, $13 billion that it is now. But I don't know, fingers crossed.
I'm scared a little bit.
So am I. Sylvain, merci beaucoup. I appreciate the time.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. Sylvain Larocque at the Journal de Montréal. Yeah, you don't want to get the Quebec government to invest money for you. Where is Pierre Fitzgibbon now? When I asked the question how involved, 100% involved. And we've not heard a word from him after he bought his BMW motorcycle. Nothing. I'd like to be able to find out from him what he thinks about all this.
Canadian women are looking for more out of themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.